So because I want my opponent to be as worried as possible of plays that I could make from my hand whenever I go to make some attacks, I always want to show as much mana as possible during my attack step, which means that when I'm playing a card like Streambed Aquatex, I want to save that for the second main phase. I will go through my attack step, and in this case I'm going to attack with the Tidal Warrior, because why not? It's not blocking, and get a point of damage in. And then in my second main phase, I will play the Aquatex. It's a really kind of easy first lesson when you're new to Magic about sequencing, to play as much as you can in the second main phase rather than the first, if there's no really good reason to do otherwise. For example, if I was going to play the Reejerey, I would have done that in the first main phase, because that would have allowed me to attack for an extra point of damage with my Tidal Warrior. But if I wanted to play any of these other cards, I would have waited to the second main phase to do it. Okay, back to my opponent's turn. We'll see what they have to play. It's a mountain into Goblin Rabblemaster. This is a very scary card. So for 2 and a red, he gets a 2/2 Goblin Warrior. First of all, other goblin creatures he controls attack each turn if able. Secondly, at the beginning of combat on his turn, he creates a 1/1 red goblin creature token with haste. Now already, because of the Goblin Chieftain, that's actually going to be a 2/2. And finally, whenever the Rabblemaster attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking goblin. So the larger the horde of goblins on my opponent's side gets, the more damage this Rabblemaster is going to do. Now on the bright side, the other goblin creatures you control attack each turn if able clause is going to force his Goblin Chieftain to attack this turn, which is going to allow me to block and kill it with the Aquatex. So I at least have that going for me. On the downside, the 1/1 turned into a 2/2 goblin that he's created here, when it attacks me, is going to, I almost clicked through my block step there, is going to be able to deal 2 damage to me. So he is getting that tempo in. So yeah, I'm going to block the Goblin Chieftain. I'm going to take a total of 7 damage here. Go down to 11 life. But at this point, I'm okay with that, because I do think I'm going to be able to stabilize. My opponent's last recourse is to use Goblin Grenade, which for a single red mana is a sorcery that allows him to sacrifice a goblin and deal 5 damage to target creature or player. He sacrificed the goblin token to deal 5 damage to me, taking me down to 6 life. That's precarious, to say the least. I could have difficulty stabilizing from there. But on the bright side, because he doesn't have too many goblins left, his Rabblemaster will be blockable with my Aquatex on my next turn. Okay, so here we go. Play an island. We have a couple of options here with our 4 mana. We could Mind Spring for 2. We could play the Cold-Eyed Selkie. We could play the Rootwater Hunter. But the only real one that I'm going to consider is the Reejerey. The Reejerey buffs my board by making Tidal Warrior into a 2/2 and Aquatex into a 3/4. It blocks reasonably well itself as a 2/2 and gives me the best chance to deal with my opponent's attempt to deal those final 6 points of damage to me. The Cold-Eyed Selkie is too aggressive a play when my goal right now is to stabilize my own position. The Rootwater Hunter is too slow, and the Mind Spring just doesn't affect the board at all. So it will be the Reejerey that I play here for blue, blue, and 1. That all being done, I'll pass back over to my opponent. Nope, I don't want all to attack. I'm not going to attack with anything. My opponent on their next turn is going to be attacking with a 1/1 and a 3/2 at the very least. The 3/2 I want to block with the 3/4, and the 1/1 I want to block with the Tidal Warrior. I'll leave the Reejerey for any further attacker that my opponent might come up with. Alright, opponent plays a Goblin Goon, which is a 6/6 Goblin. But it can't attack unless my opponent controls more creatures than defending player, that's me, and it can't block unless my opponent controls more creatures than the attacking player. So as long as I maintain an advantage in the number of creatures on board, I'm going to be able to blank that Goblin Goon. Now, my opponent opponent's Rabblemaster creates a token, and the token has to attack in. I will block the token with the Aquatex. And you know what? I'll block the token, which is only a 1/1. Well, no, that's fine. Just block the Aquatex. There's an argument for double blocking there against tricks that my opponent might have, but because my opponent is tapped out of red mana, I'm not going to worry about that. Okay. So, we draw for the turn a Misdirection. This is an interesting spell. It says you can exile a blue card from your hand rather than play Misdirection's mana cost. So I can either play 3 blue, or I can exile another blue card, and it allows me to change the target of a spell with a single target. So if I would have had this when that Goblin Grenade was played, I could have used it to redirect the damage to my opponent or one of my opponent's creatures. Nice to have in hand, but not something that I really have a ton of use for right now. It's dependent on my ability to react to my opponent. Currently, with 5 mana in play, I'm going to be looking at either the Cold-Eyed Selkie or the Rootwater Hunter. The Selkie is a more aggressive play, and the Rootwater Hunter a little bit more defensive. Because I do want to be defensive right now, I think I'm going to lead on the Hunter. But actually, as I say this, I realize that things are actually a little bit better for me than that. I can play both of these creatures this turn. That's because the ability of the Reejerey. I'm going to play Rootwater Hunter for blue, and 1. Then the Reejerey's ability is going to allow me to untap the island. And then using that untapped island, I can play the Cold-Eyed Selkie. Again, for blue, and 1. Perfect. So I'm putting a lot of creatures on board in order to make the Goblin Goon less relevant. I'm giving myself a very significant fleet of blockers against the aggression seen with the Goblin Rabblemaster. And the existence of the Rootwater Hunter is going to help me start to deal with my opponent a little bit more effectively once it loses its summoning sickness. Now, it's not to say we're out of the woods yet. We're looking a little stable on board, but my opponent could still have reach, and we're down to 6 life. It's critical that we kind of have this misdirection to stop my opponent's first bit of reach from dealing too much damage. My opponent plays a Ghostfire targeting me. So that's going to deal 3 damage to me, and I have to decide whether or not I want to redirect that. It's a bit of a loose use of my misdirection, except that I can kill the Goblin Rabblemaster, and I do think that's a worthwhile approach here. So I'm going to play the misdirection. I'm going to do that by playing the alternative cost and exiling the Mind Spring. And then I'm going to redirect the Ghostfire to kill the Goblin Rabblemaster, protecting my life total and ensuring that I'm even more stable on board. Alright, so I do have card advantage here. If we count active cards, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and my opponent has 1 and 3 in hand. So I do have a single point of card advantage, plus I'm drawing a card here. And I drew the card Aquatex Will. This is a nice one. Aquatex Will is a sorcery. Specifically, it's a tribal sorcery with the Merfolk type. And for a single blue mana, I put a flood counter on target land. That land becomes an island in addition to its other types. And if I control a Merfolk, I draw a card. So I do control a Merfolk. And because this is a Merfolk spell, it will count for Reejerey's ability. So I can actually effectively play this for free. I'll cast Aquatex Will. Oh, sorry, I gotta put it in my main phase here. Cast Aquatex Will, targeting my opponent's mountain. I will pay a blue mana, but then Reejerey's ability will activate, and I'll be able to immediately untap that blue mana. Or that island, I should say. My Aquatex will resolve. That will allow me to draw a card because I control a Merfolk. The card I drew was Harbinger of the Tides, which is a very nice defensive creature here. And now I can start thinking about my own attacks. And now we're going to have to kind of get really in-depth in our thought process here. We're still the control. We don't want to be overly aggressive. But at the same time,